Hello and welcome to episode 5 of FASD What's the Crack with me, Scott, and my co-host today is
Robert. Hello, how are you?
Robert. That sounded that's your son.
I know, yeah, Robert. I've gotten into introducing myself as Robert.
Oh, have you? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm surprised you still sound Irish actually after a month away.
Yeah. A few people have been asking me where's my accent.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've gotten very used to talking slowly, I think. I'm talking very, very slowly and more pronounced,
Yeah.
so that they can understand me a little bit easier.
So things are all right in Croatia anyway, Rob. Yeah.
Yeah, things are all good. Yeah.
Still enjoying it?
I am.
Yeah.
I am enjoying it. A few exams and presentations and bits coming up soon now, coming to Christmas, so I have to knuckle down at them.
Yeah, see, I didn't realise that people did exams before Christmas when they do, in kind of further up education, because Jacob's doing his leaving cert this year, so he's got exams at the minute, and then he went to the open day at Galway for next year for university, and they were saying about, we had to look at the kind of timetable for the year, and there's exams, there just seems to be exams all the time.
Yeah, it's a lot of continuous assessment in college and universities there, but I think Ireland tends to do it a bit more than here. Here it just seems to be two kind of blocks of exams in a semester, like kind of midterms, more so like secondary school midterms, and then they do exams after Christmas here as well. Whereas in Ireland, normally January is like a midterm break, so there's no exams really after Christmas. It's more of a holiday or something.
Yeah. Well, glad you're still enjoying it.
Yeah, and you have a November tan, which is rare for somebody living in Ireland.
You're right. A November tan, I love that. That's what I'm going to refer to it as from that. Yeah, I just had a bit of a break there. I mean, unfortunately, we well, I say unfortunately, there's no unfortunate about it. We took a couple of weeks out because, well, you know yourself how busy it's been this year. And then obviously when you left, we had to pick up your work.
You make me feel bad. You have a very interesting interview for us today that you did.
I know, yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of came out of the blue a little bit. So Rob's mentioned in the interview that we've got coming up. So we've got an interview with a gentleman called Frank, who's from Donegal. And I basically put a call out for foster carers because we are finding a lot of foster carers are dealing with FASD. We did our last introduction. Oh no, we did tell you what it was. We did an introduction to NVR, which is non-violent resistance training. And Al, one of my friends who edits this podcast for us, he's a NVR practitioner, and it was all foster carers who came along, and I think there was 7. Because normally we do it in a small. Normally he would do it in a small group of 6, but we ended up selling 7 places. Anyway, long story short, lots of foster carers on that, and it was really eye-opening for me just how many foster carers are actually dealing with young people and children with FASD. And sadly, there's just nothing around for them. So I put a call out to one of the people who had attended actually and asked her if she would like to come on the podcast, but she wasn't too keen because she's not really a public speaker. But anyway, she found Frank for me, and Frank is a foster carer. His foster children don't have FASD, but he adopted prior to that, and one of his kids had FASD. Well, one of his kids had a diagnosis of FASD. So he was really keen to come on and share his story from a perspective of being a parent. I mean, there's loads of stuff it was a really interesting chat, and I think that anybody who's listening and has got this far, do wait on the interview coming up because it is quite insightful. Yeah. It's also quite impactful. Well, we both listened to it. Well, I interviewed him, you listened to it since, and there was lots of things in there that for somebody who has a child with FASD like really struck a chord with me. There was
relatable.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Even just from knowing you and stuff and the stories you've told, and like the similarities were quite striking, and like you'd I don't want to paint anything with the one brush or something, paint everyone with one brush, but it is quite like a typical story of what can happen, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it's interesting. It talks. You ask some pretty good questions, to be honest, and you get talking about the sports and how things could be different. And it's just nice to see somebody else's opinion other than ourselves on what could be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because he had a different kind of view on that, didn't he? I thought, because I thought, having lived with it, he would have like a list of stuff that he'd want to change, but actually what he said, and without giving too much away, what he said he'd like to see changed is just more information out there about it.
Yeah. Awareness, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So education, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, more education, more awareness. Something we obviously are always trying to do. Even
absolutely.
That's kind of the purpose of this podcast, isn't it?
Well, that would have a bit of a laugh, yeah, exactly.
And a bit of a laugh, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, so it was a really interesting chat, and he has offered to stay involved in FASD Ireland as well, which I thought was really kind of him, because finding people who want to share their story in that way is a really kind of key part of people being able to understand that they're not alone. But secondly, decision makers need to listen, because this is somebody who's had this experience, and Frank and his wife spent a lot of money and a lot of time supporting their son out of their own pocket, and it's definitely something that we need to see change on. So
yeah. And
cool. So we'll play that in a minute. Was there anything that stood out for you specifically from when I was talking, without giving too much away? Obviously, there's no point in us talking about the whole interview, because then people wouldn't.
Yeah, well, it was just, well, this his story itself is, well, it would stand out to anyone, really. It's definitely worth the listen. And then his views on it, it seems like a really proactive guy, like, really chased after it once figured out what was happening, and then for him to kind of, I suppose, be let down by the lack of awareness and stuff is something that did strike me.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
I know it's really hard for.
I don't want to give. I'm picking my words carefully here, because I don't want to give anything away. But no, it's definitely worth the.
Well, I think just to publicly say thank you to Frank for sharing his story, because I think that I know that it was the first time he's kind of publicly been interviewed about it, and I know that he wanted to do it, but I just think thank you for doing that, Frank, because we do
thanks, Frank. Yeah, definitely.
We do appreciate your input. So we'll play that in a minute, but this is our penultimate episode for the first series of the podcast, and I think it's been quite varied. So next month, so December's podcast, which is going to be a Christmassy kind of thing. So no, it's not.
Are you dressing up as Santa Claus?
No, we'll get somebody else to do that. So next month we're going to do it a bit different. We're going to have a reflection on the year that we've just had. So we're going to reflect on 2023. And
what a year it's been.
And what a year it has been. Yeah. I'm hoping that we might be able to make an announcement in that podcast about something, but I can't say too much at the minute. So we'll see what happens. But so next month, hopefully, fingers crossed, if we can all be available, it'll be myself, it'll be you, it'll be Maggie, and we're going to have Tris on. So for those of you that don't know, Tris is our CEO.
The boss man.
He's the boss. And he hasn't been on the podcast because he wanted us to crack on with it. But I think it's important that we get him on to hear his voice. And I think we need to kind of almost interview him a little bit about FASD.
I was thinking that,
But I also want us to reflect on the year that we've had working at FASD Ireland. And, I know that you left us in July, but you still.
You
No, I don't think. I mean, you left us
you left us.
as an employee in
Folks,
July.
I was going back to my education is what I was doing.
Yeah, and before we started recording, you asked me for a job next summer, so just mind yourself, right? But no, in all seriousness, like you were there for 7 months, and 7 months of the year, that's a good chunk of time. And you know, a lot has happened. We did a lot of stuff in that 7 months as well. So you know,
Yeah, for
hopefully
sure.
next month we'll be able to have a think about and some reflections on that. And yeah, it should be we should have a laugh and. I mean, a laugh during the episode because it'll be hopefully 4 of us.
That's always a laugh when the 4 of us are.
Absolutely,
chatting,
yes. So, but I think for now, what we'll do is we'll just go on to Frank's interview, and we will not come back in the end. We'll just let that fade out. So, have a good month, Rob.
Yeah, you too, Scott. And thanks again to Frank for sharing the story.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
So today I am joined by a new contact of mine who has come from well, I wouldn't even like to say how I found you, Frank, but I found you anyway. So thank you for coming on today. Do you want to just give us a quick introduction to yourself, and then we'll get on with our little interview.
Not a bother, Scott. Thanks for having me on. I suppose Scott says my name is Frank. I'm a foster carer. I'm based in Donegal. And I'm also a father of, 3 children, 2 which I adopted. And we have another girl that came along as well. They're all grown up, and one of them is no longer with us, Paul. And I suppose I came on to talk a bit about FASD, or maybe to give a better public awareness of FASD. I was born in Glasgow, of Donegal parents. Came home to live in Donegal, but spent a lot of years living outside of the country as well. So
you're a fellow Scot, so that's good to know already.
No, I always say when someone tells me fellow Scot, I say I'm only Scottish through circumstance. my passport is clearly Irish. So.
Fair, absolutely fair. You can tell there's a little bit of a Scottish twang there sometimes when I'm talking to you. It's maybe because I'm talking to you. I don't know. Well, you're very welcome to come along to be here, Frank. I really appreciate you giving up your time, first of all, and secondly, you know, the story that part of it you've told me already, but you know, certainly it is an interesting story you've got. So, 2 adopted children and a birth child, and I guess as a fellow adoptive parent, I'm very interested to know about, first of all, when did you find out about FASD? Like, you know, was it something that you knew about early on, or, you know, when did you become aware of this condition called fetal alcohol syndrome, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, as we call them now?
Well, it's a word I'd never heard of, or a condition I'd never heard of. We adopted the 2 children at 1.5 and 2.5 through the Catholic Children's Society in the UK. And when the kids became school age, we came home to live in Ireland. It was just a lifestyle change that we wanted to make. We wanted our kids brought up in Ireland. The kids, we always worked our kids through school. We done a lot of extra work with them. The kids seemed to cope at school in terms of, with no matter how much extra work we'd done with them, we could never get them over the average or slightly above average. And it did worry us at times because we knew we were putting extra into them. And they survived primary school pretty much okay. Paul would have been very competitive, didn't like getting beat at anything, just a trait that he had, and went to secondary school. And Marie went on and had a successful career for herself. She went to college. She had a child very young who we looked after when she went back to college. Myself and my wife looked after our grandson. And Paul at secondary school, I don't think they could. At primary school, they coped quite easily with not easily, but with a bit of work, coped with the basic subjects. When they went to secondary school, I think it was overpowering. And it was probably then that we knew there was something wrong with he. Paul went from being a lovely lad to being totally disruptive in school.
Right.
And it was only in latter years we learned that it was a coping mechanism for him. And he spoke about it to us at different times. It was his only way of coping and getting through school. He became disruptive in class. And he was known for being disruptive in class. But when he left school, he was a hard worker. He had 2 or 3 little side jobs, and when he left school, he done a trades course, which he decided after doing it he didn't want to be that trade, and but he ended up getting into alcohol and drugs, which would have been alien. I'm not saying alcohol's alien, but I mean,
yeah,
and the way he was doing it was alien to us. And excuse me, Paul ended up involved in criminality, which once again would have been alien to our family. And he ended up going to a drug and alcohol counsellor who recommended that Paul. That's the first time I ever heard of FASD, I suppose, from his out of that guy's mouth when he told us it, and he recommended us to go and speak to. At the time, he would have been. He's actually world renowned, I suppose. In my reading, I've done a bit of reading up on him, and
yeah,
he was a fellow called Dr. Kieran O'Malley. Kieran would have been based in Belfast originally, and then he'd one on the Charlie Mont Clinic in around Dublin. So we spent the best part of 2 years up and down to Belfast and Dublin, trying to get Paul not even diagnosed, because he diagnosed him very quickly, but it was about trying to give Paul Kieran was teaching Paul the skills to learn to cope with his condition. But Paul was going through a court case at the time, and we made it clear to Paul that we were not doing it because we believed that for what Paul done wrong, Paul should have served some time for what he done. Paul got off in the courts and just dropped Kieran O'Malley the minute he got off in the court. So that kind of finished ours with, if Paul didn't want to do it for himself, we were enabling Paul really by running them everywhere and doing it. He had to want to do it himself, and he didn't want to do it himself. So Paul ended up leading a life of drugs and alcohol, and then he would work, and he'd earn good money for a spell, and then he'd become a fortnight millionaire for a time and live like a king, and then go back into the life that wasn't for us, I know. So we had to, we told Paul he couldn't live in the house anymore, that it was, there had to be some ground rules for him, and he wasn't prepared to accept the ground rules in the house. So we just felt we were enabling him all the time, and we had to cut out of that. Now, we were always there for him. We were still he would come home at Christmas, he'd come home at different times of the year, but he'd only be home a couple of days and fall out again, and Paul would move on. And Paul went to live in the UK, and Paul just couldn't cope with life. And I suppose it's 4 years ago now, Paul ended up taking his own life. And it's, I just don't think Paul could cope with. Paul couldn't cope with being adopted. Paul couldn't cope with that. He just couldn't control his own life. And as time moves on, I put a lot of that down to fetal alcohol syndrome. A lot of symptoms of stuff that Paul had. Like, Paul never had, for example, any of the pygmy-like features of. He was 6'2", big, handsome, strapping boy that with words in Scotland, but I'm not even going to use them on a podcast. I mean, he had no problem attracting females, let's put it that way. And but he lacked self-esteem. He seriously lacked self-esteem. He felt worthless a lot of the time. And funny, he always used to say to myself and my wife, "You just don't stop nagging me. You just don't stop nagging me." We used to say, "Paul, we're not nagging me. We're trying to keep you right."
Yeah.
And funnily, maybe 2 or 3 nights before he took his own life, he phoned home and he said to his mum, he said, "Mum," he said, "just want to let you know," he says, "that I understand now more what you mean when you say, when I used to say you were nagging me." He says, "I know you weren't nagging me. It was you were doing it for the right reasons." So that's a basic introduction. Yeah. That's how we first heard of FASD.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, it's quite the story, I think, because it's, you know, there I guess in some ways there was an end to it for him, in terms of, you know, he made a decision, and, you know, as I was saying to you beforehand, you know, I had personal experience of someone taking their own life within my family as well, and it's never something that's easy for those that are left behind to deal with, and, you know, there's no way in this world it should happen, but I think that, you know, somebody who decides to do that, they do it for a reason, and, you know, sometimes we will never know the reason. I think that, you know, as we were talking about beforehand as well, you know, we know now, well, we know that, you know, young people traditionally or historically, young people with FASD do tend to make that, or there's statistics that say how many, you know, have decided to do that for themselves and you know, take their own lives. And I think that's just something that people need to be aware of, you know. I've never spoken to somebody who has parented someone with FASD whose child has gone on to take their own life. So I appreciate you sharing that very much, and I'm sure listeners do as well. And, you know, there is nothing that anybody can say apart from, you know, obviously condolences for that. But if I can kind of go back a little bit as well, because you've mentioned lots of things, lots of traits, lots of symptoms, lots of behaviors there that a lot of people who are living with FASD will recognize, or living or caring for somebody with FASD will recognize. And one thing you mentioned earlier on was competitiveness and lack of empathy. What I mean, what did you put that down to when he was younger? Was there something that you kind of pinned on, or was it, you know, you were thinking, oh, is this adoption? Is this a trauma from, you know, being adopted? You know, I don't know if they were in foster care before they came to you, or if they were, you know, because I'm not sure how long ago it was. But did you pin it on something, or was it just you thought that was that was his nature, that's the way he was?
No, it was unnatural. He was unnaturally competitive. Like, if it was run a race with the kids, he would cry if he didn't win. Mm-hmm. He would, you know, just it was unnaturally. Now, listen, if I'm playing a game of Monopoly, I have to win it myself, so I would be competitive.
Yeah.
Even doing things like that, you know, nearly cheat to win a game of Monopoly from playing with my brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was different. I knew it was different. It was different.
Did you feel it was unhealthy?
Yeah, because we used to sit down and we'd often have had to sit down and chat with him and say, "Paul, you can't win everything. Like, you can't, you know, you just can't be a part of. You just cannot win everything that you take part in. Like, it's about playing. It's about being involved. It's about all the different things. It's just not always about winning. Like." But I just put a lot of it down to that maybe if he won the race, even at that young age, it may be something that he was lacking. Like, as I say, I spoke about self-esteem. It just made him maybe feel that little bit perkier, or it maybe give him a lift, kind of.
Yeah. And in primary school as well, because it sounds to me like the experience of primary school sounds like you had some work to do. But was there a lot of support in place in the school, or was it just a really good school that you went to?
No, it was just an average rural Irish school, primary school, and our national school, as it's known in Ireland.
Yeah.
No, there was he was just treated as a normal child, and he was no way disruptive in class then or anything like that. But we always had a good relationship with the teachers. My wife actually worked in the school, so
right.
She was a secretary in the school, so she knew what the kids were and their standing in the school, and we just always have done a bit extra with the kids because we felt that we needed to. We knew we needed to keep them at. And I suppose, I spoke to you earlier about nature and nurture. Listen, we knew very little about the children's background, other than they came from an alcohol related background of both parents being chronic alcoholics,
right,
and abuse, and they grew up in an environment that wouldn't have been the nicest, and they went into foster care. So we put a lot of it down to their early upbringing, but when you're a young couple, like we were only young when we adopted the children, and we always had it in our heads like this: you can, they come on us at 1.5 and 2.5, and they'll grow out of that. But as you grow older, and maybe both of us done a bit of work in childcare, and you realise quickly that how important those early years are with attachment and different things like that.
And of course, they've had experiences of trauma before they get to you, so therefore that's within them, isn't it? And I think that's quite a common thing in terms of adoption, isn't it? Or it used to be. I don't know if maybe it is so much now. I don't know, but I remember thinking those same things. Oh well, when they come to us, we'll help them and we'll do this and we'll repair everything that's happened and blah blah blah. But it doesn't. You like you say, you very quickly realise that's not something that you can do. It's just impossible.
No, you can listen. You can only try and give the children the tools. You learn quickly that you have to try and help them. You basically give them a foothold up the ladder of life, basically, and you need to try and give them the tools to cope with life. And as we go, I suppose that's one of the reasons we get involved in fostering as well, because most kids that come into fostering and possibly adoption, in the way our children come into adoption, is they have all come from traumatic past. There's so much trauma in their lives, and it's only as you go older you do realize how much an impact early life trauma has on children. You see children now in fostering, and they've gone to this flight freeze mode, and you're standing watching a child freeze in front of you, and unless you have an understanding of it, you're looking at it, well, what is that all about?
So thinking about support then, because I'm very conscious that the support came to you through Kieran O'Malley as a result of a discussion with a drugs and alcohol counsellor. But how difficult was it to access that support? I'm saying support like it was the solution. It obviously wasn't a solution, but it was certainly an entry point for you in terms of access to Kieran O'Malley. How easy or hard or costly, or how?
Yeah.
Because we're living in Ireland where nothing seems to be available in terms of certain conditions. Certain conditions still aren't recognised, FASD being one of them.
Well, I spoke to my GP about it originally, and he had heard of it, but knew relatively nothing about it.
Yeah.
Now, when I went to Kieran O'Malley, there was nothing on the, I suppose I was going to say National Health, or that's another Scottish word, isn't it?
On the National Health, yeah.
Yeah, there was nothing on the. So I suppose Kieran O'Malley's name was given to me. Now, we were just in a fortunate position where, I suppose, maybe say a luxury position, because it was so important that we could afford to go to Kieran O'Malley. Now, Ciarán O'Malley was seen privately. He was a private practitioner.
Yeah.
Very successful private practitioner, very good from my understanding of it. He was very good anyway. But it was like we were traveling from Donegal to Dublin and from Donegal to Belfast. 1 week, maybe a fortnightly trip. Obviously Ciarán O'Malley had to be paid, and even back in them years, it might have been 100 sterling or 120 sterling or something to see him. But then you just trip up and down to Dublin, or you trip up and down to Belfast, and your day away, and so you'd rattle on your diesel or petrol, and so you'd rattle up 500 quid very quickly on a day. Yeah. So from that point of view, I would say it was out of a lot of people's reach, which isn't fair either, like, because it should be available to everyone. Or something should be available to everyone, and it shouldn't just be because you were lucky enough to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
So that would be one of the big gripes I would have always had with it, that it was out of reach for a lot of people. And I mean, how many? Ciarán O'Malley was the only one I knew of.
Yeah.
And I don't know, was there many more Ciarán O'Malleys? Because I never looked into it, because we were always happy with the treatment that Ciarán was. I call him Ciarán. I really should have seen Dr. O'Malley was given, like, and
I mean, it's safe to say. I was going to say, it was safe to say that Dr. Ciarán O'Malley's name in Ireland is well known within kind of the FASD circles, and sadly he has now retired. And I think that he specialised quite well in it. And it's quite strange that there has been no real replacement for him. There's people who maybe dabble, but there's no specialist in Ireland who can who can really deal with FASD. And the fact, so which leads me on to my question really about the support that he gave you. I mean, one person supporting all these people in Ireland. The statistics are quite high for Ireland. There is no way one person could support all of those people. I mean, do you know how? I mean, how much support did he give you? Was it just on the day, or was there follow-ups, or I mean?
Well, I suppose the fact that we were going once a fortnight, and he was giving Paul tasks. He was giving Paul tasks to do. He also had Paul on a medication that was I would say nearly to level him out, because Paul was nearly like hypertensive all the time, and this was just kind of a balancing thing. But even with the FASD, Paul would take his medication for a couple of weeks. Then all of a sudden, Paul would diagnose himself.
Yeah. Okay.
And say, I don't need to take that.
Yeah.
And you could see the physical change in him. You could see the hypertension starting to rise again, and things like that. But I mean, in terms of, I can only really gauge, as I say, it was totally new to us, the FASD. So I wasn't even anyway aware of how big it was. It was only when I started doing a lot of reading myself on it. And I realised, like, I mean, I remember seeing kids on the street with terrible word to use, but pygmy-like features, which is how it's described. But I didn't know what that was.
Yeah,
I hadn't a clue what it was, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that most people wouldn't know what it was. And it just, and that was only one of them. Like that was one feature that stood out.
Yeah,
was the pygmy-like features. Now, I say Paul was a big handsome lad, and his sister's an absolute stunner.
Yeah.
So that certainly didn't affect him.
And I mean, the facial features are, these days anyway, the number of children with FASD with facial features is quite low. So if you're seeing people when you walk out in the street, I mean, that's, it's not necessarily saying that they've got it, but certainly if they've, they seem to have the features. And there was a time where pediatricians were diagnosing on features and nothing else.
Well, see, when you say that now, Scott, like when I say, like I came from I was born in Scotland, Glasgow, in a very working class environment. And I would say there was a lot of alcohol. There wouldn't be much drugs and that about at the time. And I suppose I'm going back to, you're right when I say I see an odd pygmy-like feature now.
Yeah. But
going back to my childhood, like, I seen a lot more of it then. But you're right when you say that it certainly isn't as much. But it's now when I see someone with those features, I suppose it nearly sets an alarm off in my head when I often see them. I think, oh God, I wonder, does that poor person, I mean, is that what's wrong with them, or is it,
Yeah. And of course, we're not the people to question it, are we? Because
no, certainly not.
we can hardly go up to random people in the street and ask them.
Yeah.
So the toll, I mean, the time on all three of you, really, going up and down to Belfast or Dublin to see Dr. O'Malley, the cost. I mean, add on to that then the experiences that you had as parents, having to try and help him manage his symptoms, and when symptoms is a nicer word than behavior, but at school, all the issues that you had at school, was he ever excluded from school, or
I would think he would have one or two suspensions in his time.
Okay.
Never expelled, but and I think that was due to the fact that we had such a relationship. We had such a good relationship. We knew we were very proactive.
Yes.
As parents. So I suppose that the school knew that what Paul was doing would have been alien to.
Yeah.
Would have been.
Yeah. But given all that, then, I mean, what impact did that have on you and your wife? I mean, as parents, I don't know about you, but they reach a certain age and you don't stop being their parent. They get to the age of 18 or 21. You don't stop being their parent just because they've reached an 18 or a 21, ages. What kind of impact has it had on you guys having to cope and deal and manage? And
listen, that period of time the school thing we cope with it because it was just part of life. We cope with it, but when to get involved in what Paul got involved in, and to see the family name in the paper and in the media, it was like an intrusion to have guards come into your house and search your house, and the guards apologising to you coming in because you know them through different things you're involved in, and them apologising to you. They've a warrant to search the whole house, but they say to you, we're only interested in Paul's room, and I suppose in that, in fairness, them only touching Paul's room when they had a warrant to do the whole house. It was intrusive. It was a really, really difficult time in our relationship, because it was probably Mum being a bit stricter than Mum, say, and us sort of saying, listen, a mother being a mother and a father being, I grew up the way I grew up with, and I would probably have been sorer on Paul in terms of, shake yourself up a bit, and I'm not putting up with this stuff, and there's a lot of that in it, and it affected us hugely from that period of he left school probably at 16 till the day. Like, we used to sit home at night when he first moved out, and you'd be lying in your bed on a Saturday night and you'd be getting a phone call from the cops, and that your son's been lifted and he's down in such and such a police station, and someone has to come and bail him out. And part of you wants to say, me saying, no, well, bloody let them sit there, like, and Maury saying, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, that part of it. And one of the things we actually said that we didn't, like, we used, you lay awake an awful lot of nights worrying about them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the things we said we didn't miss. You know, it sounds, we feel guilty about saying it.
Yeah.
But we didn't miss it after
Yeah.
after Paul's passing, like,
yeah.
That there was no more lying awake at night waiting on a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah,
that part of it had gone. Now you're lying. I suppose. Listen, eventually you have to move on to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
You don't forget, like you,
right.
But you're not lying worrying.
Mm-hmm.
That phone's going to ring. Like, the phone could ring at 3, 4 in the morning. Like, that mad stuff. Like, that went on for a long, long time.
Yeah. So that's some of the lows. What were some of the positive things that you got out of being Paul's dad?
You know,
or parents, not necessarily just dad. Sorry, consciously.
When you had no children and 2 children came along, we're blessed to have them. We done all the things that we done, all the holidays together. We done Orlando, Florida. We done all the parks in the UK. We done holidays abroad. We done all the things that families do. We were proud of the kids. You know, we were just a normal family up till that
mm-hmm.
that age, like.
Yeah. So you've gone on to be a foster care. We won't go into that because obviously that's a
mm-hmm.
separate, not a separate part of your life, but they deserve their privacy.
Yeah.
And you're probably more aware than some foster carers about FASD. And I know that you've not got a placement with children with FASD and stuff like that. But in terms of the future, and I'm just thinking, if it ever happened that you did have a child placed with FASD, what sorts of things would you like to see having changed since your experience of accessing services with Paul and stuff like that in Ireland for someone with FASD?
Well, I suppose firstly that if there's an awareness out there, like when we adopted, we were never really told much about the children's background, so that would be something. I think people need to have as much information as is available to someone taking children on, because to think people need to understand that if you take 2 babies on, that if there is anything, well, I think they need as much just info as possible to be given,
mm-hmm.
to maybe give people, because not everyone, I don't think everyone could have the skills to cope with it.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to maybe be given that choice. That is it something you're prepared to do? I suppose it's like trauma in children is a huge thing, like, and it's something that even with the FASD, I think children that have been exposed to early childhood trauma, which I'm sure a lot of adopted children have, and fostered kids. So that's something. I just think they need as much info as can be given to them to make a choice.
Yeah. Well, Frank, I've loved listening to your story. It's not been all butterflies and roses for you, which I get, and certainly hasn't been for Paul either. I think that you are clearly an advocate for children who need help. And, you know, personally, I thank you for that, because I think that it couldn't have been easy going back into fostering after, you know, after parenting. And I did it once, and I ended up adopting the child that we fostered. So I said, right, okay, we're not doing that anymore, because we'd end up needing a much larger home. So yeah, so thank you for that. I guess it's now that we're at the end of this, is there anything else that you want to share that you haven't been able to get round to, or any asks you've got? You know, this podcast is going to be sent to people who can make decisions and who need to know about this thing. Is there any asks that you've got that you would, you know, say to them, listen, this is what you need to do? And I'm talking about ministers or TDs and stuff like that.
If it goes to people, the people in power, they need to make funding available, that there are experts that to the ilk of Ciaran O'Malley that people can get to, because as I say, finance dictates an awful lot of it, like, and an awful lot of people coming, an awful lot of these children coming into care, and that wouldn't, the finances aren't available for it. And but I suppose that with the public gets a greater understanding. Like, I would say 8 people out of 10 wouldn't know what FASD was.
Yeah. If
you were to do now you probably have figures on this, Scott, but I would say if you asked 100 people, enough huge percentage of that wouldn't know what FASD was.
Yeah, agreed.
So, just one other story we chat about. My wife always chats about it. Yeah. When you chat about a kid with FASD, I'll give you just one example, you know, of this is kind of things Paul would do. And I'm not saying Paul, I think it's kids in general, a lot of kids in general with FASD, they have this tendency to, you know, you and I know something's wrong, so you don't do it. A kid with FASD will go out and they'll do it, and they'll worry about the consequences after it's done. Whereas, so if people understand that these kids do things and they probably don't realize, like, I remember one time Paul, a 50 quid lying on the floor, 50 euro note lying on the floor, and Paul picked it up. He was in the shops on it one day, and I seen him putting it in his pocket, and he wasn't a kid. He was, and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "There's 50 quid there." And Paul put that in his pocket. And Paul's initial, whereas me and you would have handed that. Well, I don't know about you, Scott, but I said I would have handed it.
Yes, I would have done. Thank you.
But Paul's attitude was, well, stick it in my pocket, and, you know, and that's the difference. And it's down to that empathy thing. They don't maybe think that maybe someone needed that more than what he needed it. And, you know, it's about the right and the wrongs. And I suppose if people could maybe understand that a little bit, I think that's a huge thing. They put themselves in situations, children with FASD, in my understanding, that normally someone without FASD wouldn't put themselves in. And it's I always put it to that part of the brain where it was stunted in growth through this condition, like, that left something lacking in terms of empathy and different things like that.
And consequences and all that.
And consequences and all that sort of stuff, yes.
Yeah. Frank, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And I know that you've even made an extra effort because you've actually gone to your community centre to record this. So thank you so much for even thinking ahead and doing this properly with me. It's massively appreciated.
Not to bother, Scott. And thank you for having me on. Hopefully someone will get something from it.
Yeah, I would say so. Thank you, Frank.